I haven't read democratizing work yet, but I thought that was really a fantastic panel. And I want to pick up on what David was talking about, how the teaching of voice, of collective bargaining, of democracy at work can be siloed within labour studies or labour law courses. I think in coming from the UK, it got even worse than that. It got to the point where even in labour law courses, we weren't supposed to talk about collective bargaining and about voice anymore. So I'm using labour law in a wide sense to mean employment law and labour law. You know, when I started my PhD about 20-ish years ago, democracy was kind of a bad word in labour law courses. I guess in the US, maybe it was similar, like labour law just wasn't really taught anymore at university. So that's a roundabout way of saying I really, really welcome this intervention, the manifesto. I think democracy at work, for very sad reasons, very terrible reasons, is having a bit of a moment. There is also this nice book on trade unions and democracy, the Cambridge Handbook, that's just come out. And in 90 minutes, I have a book being published with Wolfgang Streeck, who Valeria mentioned, called Democracy at Work. Not democratizing work, but democracy at work. So a few books coming out, and yeah, I think that's great to see. Other people have mentioned already this issue of kind of how do we get to there from here, which of course is a massive question. And sometimes when we talk about democracy at work, I think it can feel a bit like a chicken and egg issue, because who is ever going to press for democracy at work before we have democracy at work? You know, when workers don't have a voice, how can they press to have a voice? And it can feel very disheartening. But I think instead of viewing it as a chicken and egg, what we have to understand is that pressure has to come wherever it can come from. And so it's not a question of should it be top down or bottom up. It has to be both. And it has to be universities, and it has to be, you know, on the street, wherever pressure can be built, it has to be built. So
Great.
so a shameless plug, a shameless plug.
Yeah.
Apologize.
Tammy, yeah. So your book is called Democracy at Work, and it's with Wolfgang Streeck. That's exciting. All right.
Love this panel, very excited, love a good manifesto from academics. And I guess some of my comments are really about that, about the role of academics as activist scholars, because this is quite revolutionary for most of our national context, right? That we wouldn't be these silent observers of the IR system, and that somehow we should be involved in shifting theory, shifting conversations, even being quite radical and calling for what I would think in the US context would be extremely revolutionary in terms of the way that IR theorists and also legal practitioners, and I guess I'll give a little context, like I'm a recovered industrial or decolonized industrial engineer, recovered labor lawyer, and now sort of a scholar that's thinking about worker political practice, right? And when I take all of those things in the US context, we tend, as scholars, to separate the labor question from the question of democracy in its practice. So for instance, sometimes I'm out talking to unions about what they need to do and what might be protected under the National Labor Relations Act. And they don't have any idea what I'm talking about because it's so super macro to think about the political practice of workers in their enterprise, talking about issues of democracy. And even the courts in the US, right, the Supreme Court would say there's a spectrum. There's obviously things workers can be involved with as political participation, but it has to be very narrowly employees' interests as employees. And as soon as they go across the spectrum to what the court would say is purely political, they become unprotected. So in the sense that we as educators in higher ed are talking to all the actors in the system, including workers and trade unions, when we start to tell them to democratize, we are also telling them to forget the institutions that are binding them to stop not engaging in that political practice at work. If we look at the legal theory, that might be because we want to preserve the right of employers to not be involved in political questions, right? So I really love this. I think that you're right. I think that it's long been the case that we need activist scholars. But when I listen to Adrian and some of the other persons who are talking, I think we can't do this. We can't talk about democracy. It's not just about whether we center it in workers to determine, but it's that we have to acknowledge that in most of our systems, there's a built-in hierarchy, that there have always been people in that society who were never fully engaged in democracy as a practice or even considered under the institutions. So that becomes Adrian's questions of who gets to decide and define democracy, who gets to say when we've achieved it and when we have not, right? And I mean that in every aspect of a worker's life, like their political, social, and economic participation. So I think it's quite a challenge for us, given that we're not that diverse either, right? In terms of how do we engage in this conversation? Where's the starting point? Whose burdens are there? And is this really a call for revolution from below or revolution from within? And how do we get people to do it from within if they don't believe in the institutions anyway, right? So that was a lot. Loved it, talked to everyone for the next 2 days. But I really want to bring it back to the authors and the participants in the manifesto. Who are we calling to arms? Are we part of this? And what is the role of those of us who are, you know, lawyers bound to uphold our constitutions, to just crash it all, burn it down, right? So that we can build a democracy where it is more inclusive and not, you know, reserved for certain workers and not others.
Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting and very stimulating panel. I think that what you're proposing in the manifesto, Isabelle, is a view of society and a program of action. But I also think that it's a research agenda. This is what you are proposing here. And I think that there's two ways, but listening at people, what you were saying, I think that you're inviting us to look at what are the complementarities between démocratisation, décarbonisation, and decommodification. I think, well, how do they reinforce each other? But at the same time, you're not naive, I know that. You also want us to look at what are the contradictions and the tension between these three domains. And I think for me, one of the most important one is between the décarbonisation and démocratisation. We just had, I don't want to take too much time, but we just had a case in Quebec where in one region, we had a very progressive deputy from Québec Solidaire, and there's very environmental problem within a mining. And we had the mine was unionized with a progressive union, the CSN, but there was such a battle at the end that it became a battle between good jobs and the health of the population. And imagine who won. It was the good job that won at the end. Even though we had the best condition to win on this battle, we did not. So I think that we need to study this and try to arm the people so that they can do this kind of battle.
I don't know if we want to answer. I know.
No, keep going, because we have time. We're stopping at 6, right?
Oh, is it?
So just let's let the people talk. Let the people speak. The Wakers, the intellectual Wakers.
Okay, so this is coming from my more practical experience in like working with teachers in public education in the US and healthcare workers on the front line. But what about, and building off, I think, Adrian and Tammy's points, like, what about the workers who don't want to take up these arms and participate? Because I think that does actually occur, even in unions. And the ones that do want to, some people just want to go to work, get a paycheck, go home to the family, just okay. And then there's also, you know, people in unions who do really care, but there's not solidarity even within the union, some of them, and the labor movement, and that's including, you know, unions or grassroots organizations as well. And just what comes to mind beyond my even personal experience, just like in popular media, like co-workers, for example, looking at just transition, like they don't necessarily want to lose their jobs. But how are you going to, protect the environment in the, with unions that want to keep their jobs as co-workers? So I just have, again, it's not really necessarily a question, but I think this is an ongoing debate. It's really important from a practical aspect of, do workers want this? I mean, I'm not saying they don't, but for the one they're not, it gets back to this point of giving knowledge to workers and providing training or whatever you want to call it, but you're not gonna be able to win over everyone. So I just wonder, does this just recreate and reproduce a system of winners and losers anyway?
A system, can you just, I did not hear, a system of?
A system of like providing training and knowledge to workers. Does this just, if will there just be winners and losers anyway? If people, don't want to worry about the environment or whatever. I sometimes I think I see that.
Anybody else?
Good.
Okay. Yes, okay. Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, well, thank you so much. So this has been really a fantastic panel. Thank you very much for your engagement with this, because like what's really important, I think, for all of us who initiated this is to start these conversations. Much more than the answers that I can give. Of course, I have some suggestions to make, but really it's about us, I think, as a scholarship community, to really take these questions seriously, substantively, and also in terms of our position with the problems of the world. So that is hopefully the main contribution of the book. Now, I'm going to try to address, I try to organize of course, there was too much to address, and really, again, thank you so much. And this was recorded, and I will share that with the authors so that we really will watch again this. It was extremely thoughtful. I wanted maybe to distinguish between issues that I would call more methodological issues from analytical issues. And I will start with the methodological aspects. I think one important piece which you really grasped is that we are looking at the history as being full of potentiality, and taking history and the present as a potential, I think, is indeed at the core of the CRIMT program. And in that view, the CRIMT and what we're doing around considering experimentations for better or worse work is really a super important program on the face of the world today, and the world of science in particular. So I wanted to highlight that, and highlight the fact that, of course, we need more research, because we need to understand better all these issues and the connections between the principles in particular. That is not mine. But to answer some of the questions that were raised, I think an important piece also of what we're trying to suggest here is that we should not get stuck in one principle. And this is why we think we should embrace the three together, because actually that I would love to know more about the mining case that Christian just to be briefly explained. But more often than not, when we see troubles with democratizing in the workplace, or that we tend to think it points in the direction of a trade-off between more voice for workers vis-a-vis more protection of the environment. If you inject the principle of decommodifying labor right there, you find a solution. And this is why actually, so a job guarantee, let's take that example, a job guarantee, what a job guarantee would do here is to tell everyone in those brown industries where clearly we need to close off some plants and mines are obviously places that needs to be shut down, the state is going to say, we're going to secure your path, individual path. And we're going to provide you with the ability to even decide on what you want to what type of position that you want to create for society to bring your own contribution to society. And when workers are put in the situation of full uncertainty today, where their skills will go down because they are faced with the closing of their plants, obviously they can only have a protective reaction and they want to be secured and they want to keep their job on. But put into the picture a job guarantee, it is another world. And so this is, I think, the type of thinking that we're trying to agitate, I would say, is to not be stuck into one or the other. And why the three principles are really mutually necessary to one. And this is incidentally a response to the basic income question, because obviously this is not a statement against basic income, obviously, but what basic income does not do is to put the state back into the public policy agenda that's needed to address these issues of transitions and the issues of addressing climate adaptation, because we need, I mean, climate change is happening, so we need to adapt to that, and we need to create job positions that no market will create. And so a basic income is not concerned with that, which is fine. But so it can, actually, we had many proponents of the basic income, in particular Philippe Van Parijs, who's really who signed the manifesto, and because he saw that it was actually not it's not an opposition. These can't be two mutually reinforcing policies, a job guarantee and a basic income. But certainly in the type of thinking that we are developing here, the basic income is not doing providing what we need in terms of addressing these challenges. Now, let me quickly say on the analytical front, first, maybe I'll start with that. Why ownership is not enough? Why ownership? So again, it's not that ownership is not important, of course. I read Marx, I know that's important. Yet, I think that a fixation on ownership truly misses the point, because the problem is not ownership in itself, is the connection between ownership and political rights that are attached to ownership. And so political rights, not in the sense of political rights to vote for the police, but the political rights to govern the corporation, that is to govern the very investment and get the profits from that investment. And so we of course, ownership is and should stay very important, very high on the agenda of any progressive understanding. But I think that workers' voices should come first. And workers' voice also, incidentally, strategically speaking, can be implemented without ownership. This is what, for instance, Germany teaches us in terms of industrial relations. We have Mitbestimmung in the corporation. At the corporation level, workers and their unions representatives make up for half of the board, but they don't have any shares, right? Capital shares. Obviously, we can go much further down that idea of democratizing the corporation via granting workers political rights to govern, even though they have no shares. And now, tactically speaking, I think it can be a helpful move, because of course, in this world, to say that we're going to, nationalize or take away the private property of capitalists is going to be difficult. But to make the case that, for instance, Amazon workers are actually the constituency without which Amazon would just not operate, would not exist. And based on that, demanding that they are granted the political rights to govern the entity that govern their life, it's a totally different conversation, which I think could, I know I'm dreaming here, but could become at least a conversation, and then maybe more than that. But so the challenges then that you raised, Adrian, is that all these questions about, how are we going to organize this variety of experience of workers, their views? We need to care about obviously protecting minorities, etc. Of course, and this is why I think that this is the analytical framework I develop in my research work, is understanding firms as political entities actually gives you lots of these answers, because in the history of democracy, we've gone through all those questions. In a democracy, of course, we protect minorities. We provide voices to whoever we count as citizens. I mean, all these questions we know are not set questions. Of course, citizens, who is included, who is recognized as citizens? It only suffices to look at the history of democracy to realize that we have very imperfect democracies, of course, and we have called democracies terrible systems of oppression. So that's the same type, I guess, of dynamic thinking about firms being political entities, to think that they could be understood as being on a process of democratization themselves. And so the question of who is a citizen in the firm becomes a key question. But it would be amazing if that could be not the political conversation about who are the citizens of Amazon, for instance. My understanding is that, for instance, those who are outsourced workers, independent workers, should totally be recognized as citizens of Amazon, because they are the true labor investors, without whom there would be no production, no service. But of course, we are totally far away. I'm dreaming, I'm on another planet, of course. But to bring the lens of the political democratization and this long history, painful history of democracy, and all the challenges that it has faced, and it's going to face, actually, it provides quite some guiding for the democratization of corporations. And I would like to finish, if I can say something still, about what I call the contradiction between capitalism and democracy. I think this is really, we are in a situation where we have organized, and this is our the heritage of economic liberalism and political liberalism in the West. We have inherited a situation within which we think it is reasonable, even it's a good, healthy condition to find ourselves in a situation where the political sphere is organized with a view with a view of the equality of each others. We recognize each others as equals in dignity and rights, as we say in the first article of the Declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then we'll find painfully the representative participatory systems of government that will help us make that commitment to our equality true. And this is an endless story, and John Dewey, in that perspective, I think is a very helpful philosopher to think about the challenges of a democratic practice. And then there is the economy, and the economic field, that regulative ideal of equality has no meaning. It is not even serious to consider that it should have a meaning. And here we organize the political rights according to the fact that people own capital or not. And those who own capital do enjoy the rights to govern. And this is why I think the corporation is actually the key institution that we should worry about much more than the market. But that's so that I guess is an unsustainable combination, right? And so someday, at some point, workers feel like, you know, they own this thing. That's their life. They are governed by these decisions. But in the police, we tell them, you are a citizen, you should behave, you know, like a serious citizen, and you should not vote for the extremes, and you should be serious about your vote. But then in the everyday life, we tell them, no, you're just a subordinated at best. Of course, it's a full contradiction. And so that, I guess, is a vice at the constitutional level, right? In the constitution of our societies. So yeah, I don't have any advice for the US situation, which I know is really, really bad. But yes, these are questions that go really at the root of our constitution. Yes.
Thank you.